Chapter 15. Celia came back that dark night and slid into the straw of our bed without stopping to kneel for her prayers. She didn't say a word to me, but twisted and turned, pulling our covers one way and then another. I thought we'd never get to sleep. Days later, she told me Cunningham had laughed at her feet without shoes and the stain on her dress. "You won't be here long enough to work," he had said. "You'll be out of your house and onto the road because you cannot last, and I will see sheep grazing where your house had been." I knew I'd never forget the terrible look in her eyes. "Celia," I said, "do you know what Maggie said about you?" She shook her head. I put my hand on her thin shoulder. "She said you are loyal and true, and that is what I say. No one could ever ask for more." She blinked, trying not to let the tears fall. "I always worried," she said. "Worried when it rained that the thatch would leak. Worried when the sun was hot that the thatch would burn." She brushed the back of her hand over her face. "But if we live through this, I'll never worry about things like that again." "You might even sing," I said, trying to change what I saw in her eyes. "A rusty gate, I am." And then she patted my hand on her shoulder. "I saw the dog," she said slowly, "the dog you gave to Anna. She's penned up in a cage with other hunting dogs." "Anna loves Maeve." Before I could say anything else, Granda came through the door to tell us the road people had sent him away too. It was only Sean Red who would be working on the road. Sean, because he was tall and looked older than he was. Liam and Michael were leaving Maiden Bay to walk to the port of Galway. They'd leave without a penny between them, with only the clothes on their backs. "We must have a ship to fish," Michael had told Granda, "or a ship to sail. We will go wherever it takes us. Our shoulders are broad enough to find work on the way." Again we walked to the crossroads. Mrs. Mallon's face, always red, was blotched and swollen. This time Patch and I were the only Ryans going with them. Granda had started a cough, and Celia stayed with him to give him some of the cure I had made with Anna's garlic. Poor Sean was off on the road, breaking up huge chunks of rock. We waved at the brothers until they turned the corner. Then Devlin came along on his horse. "We have taken down the shed," old Granny Milne told him. "You will see, if you look, that it is gone." "You have ruined the property," he said. "Lord Cunningham's property, Lord Cunningham's shed." "What?" Old Granny looked dazed. Mrs. Mallon pulled her away as we looked up at him. How could he be so cruel? We backed up against the edge of the road as he rode past us, the horse's hooves spewing mud and clay. We walked slowly. Mrs. Mallon weaved back and forth on the path, trying to hold old Granny up. She looked as old as Granny herself, with sunken cheeks and loose gray flesh. And Patch couldn't keep up either. His arms were like sticks, and his legs white and bowed where they hung out of his skirt. "Come, Patchine," I said, "we have to go home." Instead of hurrying, he sank down on the ground and put his arms out to me. People walked around him. That was another thing. The people. Where had they come from? They wandered along the roads in twos and threes. They were mostly women carrying babies. Little children held onto their skirts. It was such an effort to walk to Patch, to put my arms around him and pick him up. And when I did, there was nothing to him. All we'd been eating were a few fish we'd managed to poach from Cunningham's stream, and once in a while a wild onion or an old potato. I sank down next to Patch on the wet ground and watched the people. Some of them had circles of green around their mouths. I wondered what it was. I wondered how I could get some. And then I knew. They were eating grass. I told Patch. "Me," he said, "I'll have grass." I stood up again and looked at the seagrass that bent itself over the rocky road. I pulled a piece up and put it in my mouth. "Sharp enough to cut your tongue," I told Patch. I pulled another piece off for him. "Be careful." He leaned against a rock, and I leaned back with him. We lay there, sucking on the blades of grass. Clouds rushed against the blue of the sky, changing shapes as we looked. "There," I said. "That looks like the cat Mallon's had once." Patch looked up too. "Yes, Lizzie." The Lizzie shape turned into a pig, Muck. Muck hadn't had anything to eat except for the grass around the house. She looked thinner every day. Don't think about that, I told myself. I wonder if these same clouds get to Brooklyn. I pictured Maggie looking up, seeing the cat in the clouds, and Muck, and maybe even me. Maggie. Brooklyn. Horses clopping, milk in cans, no one hungry. Liam could build a shed for himself if he got there, and it would be his own. Across the fields was Anna's house. Suddenly I realized there was no smoke coming from the roof. I held my face up to feel the wind. The smoke should have been drifting toward me. I pulled myself up and waited until a bit of dizziness passed. Next to me, Patch was asleep now, his thumb in his mouth. "Stay then and rest," I whispered. "I will come back for you." The walk across the field seemed much longer than usual. I stumbled against the potato plants, dry now, stiff, crumbling underneath me. Then I was at Anna's door. Her cow was nowhere in sight. Neither was her pig. "Anna," I called, feeling my lips crack. They had been as sore as Celia's for days now. I ducked inside to see Anna lying on her straw bed, stiff and unmoving. For a moment I felt as if I couldn't breathe. Then she turned toward me. "Are you all right?" I asked. "An old woman can lie in her bed if she wishes," she said. "And there's milk. I saved it for you." My mouth watered. I didn't come for milk. I wanted it so much I felt weak. "I've had so much milk today," Anna said, "I couldn't drink another drop." "Well, then I will," I said, "and if you don't mind, I'll take a wee drop for Patch." I went to the pail in the corner. I was too weak to lift it and pour some into a cup, and there wasn't much in the pail anyway. I bent over and tipped it until I felt the warmth of it on my tongue. I had to make myself stop. Patch was so hungry on the road, and Anna... "Did you really have enough to drink?" I asked. Her eyes were closed, but I could see her nod. "Where's your cow?" I said next, still tasting the milk. "I sent her away this day." I went closer. "You sent your cow away? What do you mean, sold her?" Gave her to..." I repeated, then I knew. "Devlin?" She made a small sound. "I cured his stomach ache with a blackberry root, but he forgot that." I leaned closer. "Devlin took her for the rent?" I swallowed. All the milk would be gone now. What would Anna eat? And the pig? Did he take the pig? She didn't answer. She turned again, the straw settling under her. I stood there, heart pounding, remembering the coin. It would have paid the rent. I took a wooden cup and poured a mouthful into it. I knelt by her bed with it until she turned her head and drank. "You're a good girl," she said. I blurted it out then. "Your coin didn't even help save the Neelys," I said. "I dropped it into the well." She reached out with both her hands and put them on my cheeks. "The well? But why?" I spread out my hands. "I thought the bailiff was in back of me, but it was only the dog." "The dog?" Anna said. I couldn't tell her where the dog was. Instead, I sat there staring at the fire. "When Doc comes home," I began, "I haven't forgotten. We will give the coin to you first, somehow." Anna leaned forward. She traced a line of my chin with her hand. "We will talk about this," she said. "I have things to say to you. But now you must take the milk to Patch." I hooked the pail's handle under my fingers and went to the door with it. "I know so much about the plants now." I stopped, looking down at the milk. "I'll never forget. I'd be like Anna now, able to heal." "And something else," I said. "I will never leave you. I will stay with you always and take care of you." She raised her head, smiled, and shook her head the slightest bit. I took the pail to the end of the field, glancing around to be sure no one on the road might take it away from me. I kept calling until at last Patch raised his head and came to me across the wall.